YouTuber books. We all hate him, but I love Joseph Anderson despite his videos being so incredibly pedantic, so I decided to check out one of his books he wrote before he was a YouTuber, The Wizard and the Dragon. Before I really get into it, I will say I could not find pictures of what I really thought the characters looked like, so I made them myself, and they do look like horrible Dragon Ball OCs. So I am aware of that. You don't have to comment it, but I understand if you do. I will not make you look at them the whole time though, I promise. A boy named Bryce is forced to watch as a dragon burns his village and so many people in it to a crisp. He runs through the forest and suddenly smacks into an invisible tower. Inside is a wizard with no name. Bryce sees him walking down the stairs, lightly illuminated by fire that he holds in his hand, but he's covered in a cloak and he can't really see his face. Bryce asks his name, but he says that he has none, and he makes one up on the spot. He calls himself Tower. He will teach Bryce many things. First, I will say Bryce is a good audience vessel because he is a child and children are very curious. He asks about the tower, magic, creatures. As he learns about the world, so do you. His early character is very defined by the dragon attack. He wants to learn magic so he can go get revenge on the dragon. It's kind of like a childish dream that he doesn't fully understand the weight of. Especially at this point when his fear of the dragon has confined him to the tower. It feels like the dragon is everywhere, but it could never find him inside an invisible tower. The character Tower is pretty mysterious. We don't really know his background, but occasionally get glimpses of what it might be through short responses he gives when Bryce asks. He's pretty quiet and very knowledgeable about the world. He feels like an older brother rather than like a parent. He gets on Bryce's level explaining things and does so in a pretty casual way because he's young enough to remember how he would have wanted to explain to him. He's somewhere in his 20s while Bryce is about preteen age. It does specify, but I honestly forgot because I'm just really bad with numbers. Anyway, Tower still has this prominent emotional side to him. He's not cynical and loves to see Bryce's face when something cool is happening. But when things go wrong, he can get angry. Normally it's an anger that's in control though. It's very obvious it's his first time taking care of a kid, but he still feels like he has it all together. For a good deal of the book, Tower was my favorite character. There aren't many to choose from, but the point still stands. The book will be very straightforward with how things are delivered. Not much flowery or poetic language. That could get boring to some, but it wasn't for me. The world building feels very unique but familiar, with creatures that are similar to ones that we see in stories, but tweaked to be a little better to fit this story. Like the Ferret versus Trolls, who they're based on. The first time we see magic is from this very old, decrepit, stereotypical kind of wizard. He lives in the town and tries to defend it against the dragon, but was defeated. Tower guesses as much, which is where we learn that magic puts a strain on your body, and many magic users end up becoming much physically weaker than they should be at their age, and it makes them look older. So how has Tower stayed so young and strong? Under the tower, there are caves full of gems. These gems give off some sort of magical energy and could be morphed into many different things. Or, magic can be channeled through them instead of from the body, making the use of magic much less strenuous. But these gems seem to only be found under this tower. Suspicious. Maybe you should read the book for that one. One of the tasks they have to do before winter is gather a bunch of gems from the tunnels because the cold makes the creatures that live down there more rowdy. If they have enough gems to get through the winter, they won't have to fight in more dangerous conditions, but there's another reason. They bring a certain kind of blue gem to the top of the tower and activate this bowl that has a hole in the middle of it. The gem produces a warm sparkling water that flows down an opening that kind of follows along the wall of the stairs. This does a few important things. It lights up the tower so they don't have to depend exclusively on sunlight or candles. It keeps the tower warm, provides a water source for when they need it. As gems are used up, they shrink and they'll have to replace them, so it's not just an infinite source, and eventually they'll have to risk a venture into the caves again. While Tower gives Bryce free reign of most of the castle, there is one room that he's never allowed in. It's this room within Tower's bedroom that has a gem about halfway as tall as the door, and it kind of blocks the door. We'll get into this more later, but it's just important to know. Another thing I didn't mention until now is that Tower originally had a familiar that was like this little companion made of fire that would sit on his hand or shoulder. It ended up dying after Bryce got to the tower, and now Tower instructs Bryce to create his own familiar, and he chooses one of fire because he no longer wants to fear that element. In this moment, he reaffirms that he will slay the dragon. Tower gives some kind of regrettable look to that statement, but leaves Bryce to it. And in the morning, Bryce has his own familiar. He decides to name his familiar Candle because the flame used for it came from a candle. But Tower is nowhere to be found. So there's still a lot that happens in this first half that I haven't covered, and I would just really advise that you go on to read the book yourself. If I haven't made it interesting enough, then that's my fault, but the middle of the book is where it really starts to get insane. If there's any chance that you'd read the book, just stop now and go for it. Something happens that changes the entire story. We will be getting deeper into spoilers at this point. Anxiously searching every room, Bryce finds that the gem in front of the mysterious door is gone. At that point, I was thinking that somebody attacked the castle or something because Tower is a powerful wizard and somehow someone knew where he was, but no one else knew about the tower or people in it. Something I do really like here is Bryce goes up and down the stairs hoping he just missed Tower somehow. It's this irrational thought, the kind that you get when you lose something important like a loved one or a relationship. You know, he's in denial and he's thinking of ways he could see Tower again. Something Anderson does really well here, but also throughout the book, is make you feel like you're in this kid's head. He knows what is true, but there are these little doubts that pop up, are considered, and then wiped away. But at some point, Bryce has to admit that Tower is just gone, and we don't know where. He can't venture outside to look because his trauma is so debilitating that he is still confined to this tower. It's a home and prison of sorts. The days start to pass without consideration of Bryce's grief, so he has to tend to the tower himself. He starts to read up on familiars, and Candle becomes kind of a lovable goof despite never speaking a word. It stumbles around and falls in its early life, but something that makes Candle endearing is that it purposefully dulls its flame when touching Bryce so it won't hurt him. This new friend helps Bryce get over his grief and remember his goal: kill the dragon. Bryce turns to the caves, the creatures that live there, the ones that are hungry for anything they encounter. They would be good practice. Venturing into the caves, Candle provides a light for Bryce to see. He takes on the Farron, often using fire magic or generating some sort of magic shackles to restrain or choke them. One time he narrowly escapes because Candle gobbles up some of the gems and grows bigger, so it's able to fight off the Farron. But they end up injuring Bryce on multiple occasions, so he has to learn healing magic from scratch. He tears through the books Tower left and finds what he can, but only ends up learning basics. What I like about the beginner healing magic is that it's a lot like real-world healing. You sew up this gaping wound and just have to wait. The string used to sew is magical though, so it heals faster than the real world. To actually practice this healing magic, he uses his own wounds of course, but he also uses the dead bodies of the Farron. The healing magic in the book does have a potential to be a lot greater, but I'll just leave it at that. He continues this cycle of fighting in the caves and practicing healing for 5 or so years, but never really gets too good at healing because he never had a basis for it in the first place. This section is really hard to explain how it progresses, and is kind of another reason you should just read the book, because in the book, the years passing is represented a lot better. I can't explain as well as the book does how Bryce's confidence and abilities have grown, but by this time, he has moved into Tower's room because it's bigger, and he's even writing his own books about what he has discovered. Also during this time, he starts to experiment with learning lightning magic, which he first saw from the old wizard in his village as a kid. This is probably his most powerful attack that he learns during this time. Over the years, he has also been taking what's left of gems he's used and combining them into one big gem, just like the one that sat in front of the door that he was never supposed to open. The night before Tower left, the chapters often end on cliffhangers, which compels me to keep reading, and I read this section really fast because I just couldn't put the book down, especially after a couple more years pass and the mysterious door swings open. Bryce, Candle, and the reader cannot help but see what's in there. A light from that room encapsulates the immediate area outside of it. The bookshelf, the gem. Bryce enters the room and the door slams shut. The light swirls all around them, then suddenly disappears, leaving an empty, dark room. They leave feeling disoriented. It's nighttime, so Bryce needs to use Candle to see. He leaves the bedroom and sees the whole tower is dark. The shining water is no longer there, and there is a grime in the place where it once used to travel. As he goes down the stairs, he hears the door to the castle open. He's not heard this sound for over half a decade. Warily, he ventures down the stairs and he sees a child backed up against the door. A wave of realization crashes into Bryce and the reader, one being that all this time, he was Tower. The same sequence of events unfolds as the night he came here, but now it is seen from Tower's perspective. When the younger Bryce asks his name, he replies with Tower because he can't tell them they're the same person. At this point in the story, he has lived in the tower so long that it has kind of become a part of him, which makes the name very fitting. He also puts Candle away, knowing the younger Bryce would be scared. There's this tension throughout the whole scene where Tower has to make all this convincing while not fully believing it himself. Another realization in the series of them is this is the exact situation the last Tower was in. And that person that felt so confident, so secure in themselves, didn't know everything. That person he looked up to was imperfect and had to have been making some of it up as they went along. As a child, I think many people had the same experience. In kindergarten, I looked up to 5th graders like giants with knowledge I could never comprehend. Yet when I got to that age, I wondered why I hadn't felt like I had grown up yet. In high school, a 40-year-old teacher told me she didn't know what she was doing. And that made me realize that adults are just as faulty as you are, they just have more experience. I just love so much how this change recontextualizes everything. It is a really great way of showing this similar phenomenon. This is such a massive change in the story that I never expected. It's crazy to think that the whole time Bryce was teaching himself, you realize he was like way too young to be taking something like this on. Yet it was his responsibility and he was the only one that could. At this point, I will be referring to the older Bryce as Tower and the younger one as Bryce. If I mention the Tower we met at the beginning, I will just call him Old Tower. So you may be asking, what exactly is going on here? Basically what happened and has been happening is when Bryce goes through a lot of trials, building his confidence and skill to become Tower, once he is around 20, the mysterious room he was never supposed to go in activates. Of course, he cannot resist the curiosity and enters the room. It also encapsulates the bookshelf near the door, which is basically all the knowledge of magic that he's accumulated over time, and that way he can bring him back and improve the next Bryce. This is a cycle that has been going on for what seems like a very long time. Our main character was definitely not the first person. It seems like the kind of time travel that creates parallel universes because things can be different. We now follow Tower as he tries to teach Bryce all the things that he once learned. He tried to keep it all as similar as possible. It has been many years since then, but those memories formed him, and he pretty faithfully sticks to them until he decides to risk it. The event that killed the old Tower's candle is on the horizon, but our current Tower decided it's worth it to change it. It does save Candle, but injures Bryce in the process. It's a good trade-off that does allow a better future for Tower and Candle, but costs Bryce half a finger. This makes Tower decide that he needs to give Bryce the foundation for healing magic that he never had. So then, Bryce will be more prepared for whatever is destined to take Tower away. But since it is the middle of winter, it is too dangerous to use the Farron. Tower cuts off tiny pieces of his own finger to use for Bryce's practice. It shows his dedication to Bryce, that he's willing to make up for his own mistakes. I really like this part of the book a lot because it's like a window into the old Tower's mind. He's the perfect teacher for Bryce because he knows how they both learn, think about, and experience things. All the years alone in the tower where he had to teach himself was also a learning experience to help him understand himself. At the same time, he is wondering, what is it that comes for me and forces me to abandon this child? It's a lingering question throughout the whole section. The two Towers are the same person, of course, but the things that happen to them are different, so current Tower is different than the last. And you get to see that too with little changes in the timeline. When the time comes for Bryce to create his own familiar, he chooses fire because he wants to conquer his fears and slay the dragon. Tower now understands the face that his old mentor made in that exact moment. How could he forget? The dragon! In all the years training to go face it, he forgot why and grew accustomed to the routine he had in his home. The thing that comes for Tower is all the anger and trauma of his childhood self, and it is undeniable. He leaves the room, hoping Bryce can forgive him for this abandonment. As he starts to prepare to leave, he remembers how lost he was when the old Tower ventured off to do the same thing. He goes back to Bryce's room to give him a book on familiars. He once again is trying to make this Bryce better than him. Back in his room, Tower realizes what the massive conglomerate of gems is for. All that is energy. He fuses it into a dagger and harness that had been sitting in the room a long time and now could channel an immense amount of power through the empowered holster. He also brings Candle and an extra bag of gems. He sneaks out and runs until it turns to night. He only vaguely remembers the way back to his old village and hopes that he could find survivors. But when he gets there, he only finds one person who asks him if he is there to claim the bounty that was put on trolls that overran the village. This next section is showing how much he can expel himself with this newfound source of power that he wields. He uses some of the same moves, but amplified immensely. The little shackles he used to bind and choke the Farron are used to lift up these giant trolls into the air and rip their limbs off, rendering them immobile and bleeding out. The book describing this section feels so powerful because these trolls are massive, but also we have never seen magic used to this level. Even though the harness was a fuel for these actions, the massive amount of power being let out of it drains Tower, and he crumbles, pukes, lays immobile until the next morning. Now, his troll-killing accomplice helps him find the dragon. On the way there, he comes to the conclusion that the old Tower must have died doing this, because there is no way that he would not go back to Bryce if he could defeat this dragon, and he thinks the old Tower would do the same. He can't stand to think about abandoning Bryce forever. Eventually, he reaches the dragon. It is sleeping some distance in front of him, but it leaps awake when he gets closer. He instantly sends fire towards the dragon, but the dragon seems to capture the fire and twirl it around its wings, then shoot it right back at him. The dragon is also a magic user. Tower's attacks seem to do nothing as the amount of power the dragon has seems to dwarf his. The fire gets sent back. Tower has to use gems to create barriers that take the brunt of the attacks. But those barriers break and fire is sent directly his way. He sends lightning towards the dragon, breaking through the fire, but when it hits the dragon, it is redirected somewhere else. As the dragon wields its fire again, Candle, who absorbs some of the gems that were brought, stands in front of Tower and absorbs that fire. Our main character has a realization here, that he has taken this burden on alone, but he never had to. Throughout this story, there's been kind of this theme of the name Tower representing that character's loneliness, because a tower can't tell their Bryce all their secrets and turmoil. They have to be a little lonely. So in this moment, our main character thinks of himself as Bryce again. The dragon pours a ton of magic into its attack, which only makes Candle grow more. As the dragon's magic stamina is recovering, Candle sends all that power back to him, burning the dragon up and melting away the scales and flesh on its head. Its eyes have been melted over, and Bryce takes the dagger, stabs it into its eye, and unleashes everything that he has left into a bolt of lightning directly into the dragon's skull. A loud roar leaves its mouth as it slouches to the ground, embraced by death. Bryce backs away, falls to the ground, and cries. Candle expelled too much power that drained its body and slowly killed it. Bryce finally killed the dragon, but what does he have to show for it? So much energy has been drained from him as he lays in the same place till morning. From the point of killing the dragon to now, he has felt almost nothing. There was no relief. This was not some great victory. He lost a friend. As if time were some spiteful mistress, it took this version of Candle as well. Bryce is alone again, but pledges to return to his younger self and give him this book explaining everything that has happened. At the end of the book, he tells the younger Bryce not to hunt the dragon because it only brings tragedy. This is an ending I wasn't expecting, but one I do enjoy. The dragon is often used to represent Bryce's trauma, and every version of himself has been chasing this dragon, passing down his trauma to the next Bryce. Our main character finally kills it, but he hasn't been broken free of this generational curse. It is now his responsibility to prevent his younger self from following the same path. Though what does dampen the ending a little bit is Bryce also tells his younger self that when the time comes, he should go into the time travel room and help his own Bryce. This just seems very counterintuitive to me, because you only create another Bryce by going back in time and creating another timeline. The necessity of this was because a tower would abandon a Bryce, and then that Bryce grows up and has the chance to be better than the last. But now, Bryce has not abandoned his younger self. He has come back to live together like a family. So what's the point of creating a whole new timeline to help that Bryce when you can just raise the one you have right now to be better? Then he'll grow up and have his own family, you know? You can keep the generations theme, but in a different way now that everything has changed. So it's a mixed ending, but overall I do like it. I'm pretty sure there are sequels to this book, which is good because I want to see more of older and younger Bryce interacting, but for the life of me, I cannot find them. I swear I've heard Joe talk about them and like seen covers, but like they all just disappeared recently. But maybe I'm just hallucinating or something, I don't know. And even if you watched to this point, I think y'all should read the book for yourself because you're all missing out on some really good parts. Hopefully I'm not the only Joseph Anderson watcher who has read one of his books, because I would like to see more takes from other people, you know? But yeah, I'm done yapping. Like and subscribe, I guess. I don't know.